I feel very lucky to have had that sort of safe, beautiful experience. But it was a moment for me of taking ownership of my sexuality in a way that I hadn't previously experienced.
Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Ramanique Ahluwalia, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Ramanique Ahluwalia. How are you?
Good. Yeah.
Did I get your name right?
You did, yeah.
Yay! I give myself little prizes every time I get that right. So we start the podcast with a question, which is, who is Ramanique?
Ooh. Ramanique is an actor, creative, writer, activist, passionate person who cares deeply about things, and sometimes overshares, but always has the best intentions.
So you're apologising in advance.
just putting it out there.
Where did you grow up? Where did life start for you?
Life started for me in the Midlands. I was born in Coventry, but that wasn't really where I grew up. So I was born in Coventry, and that's where my parents lived. But from quite a young age, I would spend Monday to Friday living with my grandparents in Leicester, and went to school in Leicester. So Leicester is really where I had my childhood and where I grew up, and where I feel connected in that way.
And siblings? And who was around at the time?
I have an older brother, Ramanique Ahluwalia. My mum, dad, like I said, I saw them at the weekends, and my mum visited like during the week. And grandparents on my Indian side, so my BG and my granddad were very much a part of day-to-day life. And yeah, it was like day-to-day. That was my main sort of family and the people who were around.
And you said your Indian side.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more about that.
I'm mixed heritage. My dad is Punjabi, came over to the UK in, I think it's 1968. Met my mum. My mum is white English. They made me. So that's, my mixed heritage background.
And what was that like growing up? Because I know lots of mixed heritage children relationships, but I suppose when I think about the Indian South Asian culture, that was really early on. That would have been one of the first,
I guess,
generationally.
It's funny, having done a lot of thought work, I guess, around my heritage and identity in that way, I actually hadn't thought about it being quite an early on thing, I guess, in sort of like the timeline of immigration in the UK, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I even now sometimes when I meet other mixed heritage people of a similar age with a similar South Asian and white British background, it still feels like, oh, another one. Like it's I don't meet many of us. So yeah, I guess it was quite early on. But in terms of how it was, I feel I had such a very mixed upbringing. So my mum was very aware when she and my dad got together and decided to have kids and all of that, that their kids we would be in a very white world. Our school, our life, all of that, being raised in England, that would be kind of what the majority of our life would look like. So she and my parents made a very concerted effort to immerse us in our Indian culture as much as possible. Like that involved, we lived with our grandparents. So we spoke Punjabi with my grandparents.
You also lived in Leicester.
Lived in Leicester, which is, again, very multicultural, one of the most multicultural cities in the UK. We spent summers in India. I went over to India for like month-long trips with my grandparents. So yeah, it was, we did Christmas and we did Diwali. We kind of really had a very immersive upbringing, with our Indian culture and our Indian family. And
what was it like going to school?
Going to school, my granddad was a primary school teacher.
Okay.
So going to school for primary school, it was sort of like people knew of me and my brother already because my granddad used to teach there. So the teachers knew him, and he was the only sort of turban-wearing Indian teacher at that school. So, and he was quite a charismatic personality. So he sort of had his reputation preceded me. So going to school at my primary school was quite a enjoyable experience, and sort of fun in that way.
Yeah.
I did start, like, in those primary school years, I mostly have good memories. I have a couple of, like, the first kind of memories of sort of racial teasing. And that sort of began in, like, maybe the later years of primary school. And then, secondary school for me is when I sort of developed a kind of a discomfort around myself, my identity and all of that. I went to a private a grammar school, independent school, where the majority of people were white, privileged, wealthy. I mean, there were lots of other, there were South Asian people at the school as well. Again, it's Leicester, but also wealthy. We were sort of, my parents were stretching themselves in order to send us to that school. So I didn't really fit in that way. But yeah, it was there that I started to feel the kind of tensions, I guess, around not feeling like I fit in. And there weren't many other mixed heritage people at that school. Like I said, there were white people, and there were a good handful of South Asian people. But in terms of, like, other mixed heritage people,
just you didn't see it around you.
There
at the
weren't
time.
many. Maybe in a couple of the other years, but we were like one of a few. So.
And one of the things that I saw, because I reached out to you, there were a couple of things, but there was one particular thing when I looked at, and I don't do that much research because I think there's something really important about you sharing who you are rather than me coming with any preconceived ideas or ideals. And there's this one poem that I think is on your Instagram page about you talking about the identity. Can you just talk us through that a little?
I think it was Half Normal. Yeah. So that poem for me is a spoken word poem. And that poem for me is sort of like a personal essay, or I guess my mission statement on my mixed heritage identity. And it was, I think I wrote it, I finished it in 2021, I think. But I started it about 3 years before. And it was after I'd had an experience. I was visiting New York, so I wasn't living there at the time, but I was visiting, having moved back to the UK. And I was in a coffee shop, and I was chatting. I was just waiting for my friend to finish her shift, and started chatting to these two older white women, and they asked me that inevitable question of where I was from, or I think, I can't remember exactly how they worded it, but along those lines. And I replied very quickly, I'm half Indian, half normal. And as I said it, I was like, whoa, that's not cool. Like, it sort of like came out of me as a joke, but I almost, as soon as the phrase had finished, I was like, that's revealing. And that's not right. I need to look at that. And that was sort of the inspiration, or what kind of drove me to writing Half Normal, was that kind of examination of why, like, where did that come from? And why did I say, like, why did I say that?
It was almost like an instinctive reaction, is how you described it.
Yeah, I remember leaving and being like, oh. And then I quite quickly after having said it and sort of having all these, like, having my thoughts spiral about it, I was like, oh wait, no, like, okay, don't beat yourself up. Like, this is because the world is, like, default white. White is the default in the world, and that's the world in which you've grown up. And so that's why you're connecting it to normal and all of that. But it really was a moment of, okay, this is something, like, it didn't sit right with me, especially how quickly it came out of me. So yeah, that was kind of the inspiration behind Half Normal. And then it's sort of the first third of that poem I wrote in one sitting. It very much came out of me. It was sort of something connected, and it just came out. Yeah, I got to a certain point and I was like, it could be finished, but it's not. Like, I knew it wasn't finished. Like, it was just the beginning of a longer piece, and I didn't have didn't know how to finish it. I didn't have the answer yet. And then that was sort of the journey of the 3 years or so that passed, was figuring all of that out. And then finally, during the pandemic, during one of the lockdowns, I was like, I think I'm ready to come back to this and finish it. And I think it was off the back of BLM and or those conversations that we were having at the time, and that I was having. And I realized, like, oh, I'm ready now to I know what I want to say and what I need to say. And yeah, got it finished. It wasn't as easy as the first kind of third. It didn't come out of me as fluidly. It was still kind of churning in me. And I was still sort of processing it and figuring it out. But yeah, I finished it in 2021. And
it's an incredible piece. So anybody who's listening, please do go listen to it. What happened in your early life to get you, because again, you're coming from a South Asian background, your parents are flying the flag and doing things differently. Mm-hmm. What is the upbringing? Because you have cousins in the Indian side and the white side. Mm-hmm. How is your upbringing different, if at all, to others around you?
I mean, in terms of, like, directly different to my cousins and all of that, we lived our lives very much with our grandparents. So all of my cousins on my Indian side have had a very close bond with our grandparents. All of my aunties and uncles are teachers, so school holidays meant we gathered at my grandparents and spent good quality chunks of time together. But we lived next door to my grandparents. At various times we lived with my grandparents. So that probably is the most distinct way that kind of my upbringing is different from those other people close in my family. And then also I guess personally, my upbringing or my experience of my growing up was quite different, because I was navigating my sexuality, and that made my experience quite different from a lot of I know all of my cousins and all of that. Everyone experiences their own sort of battles during teenagehood and all of that. But I think that was my kind of personal journey, was very much figuring out my sexuality. And also I was sort of different in the way that I wasn't sort of your typical Indian girl either. I was a tomboy. So, like, when we went to India on, like, summer holidays, I was out in the gully with my brother playing cricket with the local boys and was aware that not many other girls were doing that. And likewise at home playing with it's always different at home with your cousins, you're all kids and you just sort of accept each other for who you are. But I was aware that I was a bit different because I wasn't so girly or I wasn't...
Did you know that at the time, or is it now in hindsight that you look back and go, I was trying to figure out my sexuality, or I was...
When I was younger, I knew, like, I wasn't thinking about sexuality in that way. Like, when I was younger than 10, like, I knew I was different in that I was a tomboy because it was sort of commented on. Like I wasn't your girly girl. And I enjoyed messing up, getting, climbing trees and all of that kind of stuff. And so I did have an awareness from a young age that I was different in that way. Also, like, when it comes to traditional, like, Punjabi outfits and stuff, I always felt like I was sort of being put in one. It wouldn't probably have been my choice. It wasn't something I felt comfortable in. I know my mum, like, she when I was younger, put me in dresses and stuff. And then when I was sort of old enough to express my discomfort, she eventually stopped and let me wear what I wanted to wear. So I guess in that way, at a young age, yes, there was something that I was definitely feeling that wasn't quite right, or wasn't not right. That's the wrong. There was
Didn't
definitely
feel
something
right for you.
Right for me, yeah.
When did you discover, if that's even the right word, because again, I don't mean discover, but when did you realise maybe that you were gay?
So I was never, when I was in my teenage, like, figuring stuff out, I would never have said that I was gay. So I was, I remember distinctly watching, I'm trying to think now. I had inklings. I think I was maybe 14, potentially, having inklings of, like, feeling a certain way, or like having crushes. I can't really remember that kind of specific thing, but what I can remember is watching things like Sugar Rush, and then there was very distinct. There was a storyline in Skins season 3, I think, between Naomi and Emily, those two characters, and I was very much interested in that. And I remember the scene where they sort of hooked up, and I was like, I think I was watching it with my mum and brother. I don't know why my mum was watching it with us, but I remember watching it and being like, oh yeah, I'm very interested in this, and felt self-conscious. And that for me was like a confirmation of, like, I'm not straight. Like, I'm fairly confident I'm not straight, but I hadn't found the language that was right for me at that point. So that was, I must have been about 15 maybe when that show came out. So it was around about that sort of time that I started to realise something within myself.
And you feeling the feelings that are slightly different than everybody else, all the girls, I'm assuming, talking about boys, and you're not?
Like I said, I was very much a tomboy. And for me, a big part of my journey, I guess, with my relationship with myself and all of that, was I was very much tomboy, then went to this school that I felt a little bit at odds with. And then came the dreaded non-school uniform day. Like, I had a uniform at both my schools. And then the non-school uniform day, I remember very distinctly, like, the first one, and I went in with, like so funny, because actually what all, like,
what we
Gen
wear
Alpha
today
are wearing now, like baggy pants with like a baggy hoodie and all of that, and felt comfortable. That's what I wore outside of school. And all of the other girls sort of took it as an opportunity to be wearing their best out, skirts and all sorts. And it was really, I just felt so starkly different to them. And I began to feel this pressure pressure to conform. So I definitely, my sort of journey was, I lost myself a little bit in trying to fit in.
Yeah.
And that involved, like, during primary school, my best mates were boys. I played football with the boys. Those were my sort of closest friends. Towards my last year of primary school, I had girls who were my close friends as well. But I still, I thought I liked boys. And then, during secondary school, I still very much wanted boys to like me in that way. What happened for me is I went from being like their best friend to them not being interested in me at all because I wasn't attractive to them in the way that...
You weren't girly enough.
So I sort of became a bit surplus to requirements, which made me like I wanted them. Like, unfortunately, we're all very much socialized to want, desire that sort of male gaze and that validation and all of that. And I was very much affected by that, I guess. So yeah, I definitely had like crushes on boys, and it was also what's the expectation of me. Like, so my friends are sort of getting boyfriends or like hooking up with guys and stuff. And like I said, I was very much trying to fit in. So I was putting that pressure on myself to also be liked and desired and to try and like, do the same. So it was just a bit blurry and messy. And
when does it get unmessy?
That would be in my early 20, well, I was 22, 23. That's when it finally became unmessy for me.
Okay.
I would say the ages of like 18 to then, so about, there was a 5-year period where it was like, okay, I know I'm not straight and I'm ready to be not straight, and I, tell people and be that. I felt discomfort around some of the a lot of the language to describe myself. Like I would, like I said, I would say I wasn't straight or I was into girls, or I would sort of use these sort of vague.
What was it about language that was so important to you at this point? Not just about sexuality, but all of it.
I don't know. I've been thinking about that. Like, I think maybe I put a pressure on myself, or that's probably me taking on too much. But there was a pressure from society or external factors of like needing to be sure about who I was. So I was sort of thinking about this today of like, what stopped me from just fully exploring certain things when I was younger and all of that. And it was sort of like this constant self-consciousness that I had of like, does this feel right? Is this the right thing? Like, does that feel like the right thing? Am I presenting myself in the correct way? It was very self-conscious.
And was it self-conscious for yourself or for others?
I think because I was in a situation where I was preoccupied by what people thought of me and seeking validation, it was a self-consciousness that related to how other people would perceive me.
Yeah.
It just felt very restricted.
Boundaried. You were basically put into this box, and you were trying to create this box, and this is where I belong.
And then also, like, I guess I was then at school, I think I said I was bullied at school, racially bullied, and also just about my appearance. I was like, in terms of like body hair, called a man, a gorilla, all of this sort of stuff. I was sort of ostracized for a bit by kind of my close group of friends, and just went through a time of it. Yeah. Learned some, not that, it means that I'm glad it happened or anything, but I learned a lot and learned a lot about myself and my resilience. But I think I absorbed a lot of those sort of judgments and stuff like that. So when it came to finding language that I felt comfortable using, I found it quite difficult. So calling myself a lesbian, I've really struggled at first with that. And I know quite a lot of people in the queer community have a similar experience, because the word lesbian has been used in such a derogatory way. Certainly when I was at school, the connotations of being manly or unattractive, or like even like the word butch felt derogatory back then. I feel so differently about so much of this language now.
Yeah.
But certainly throughout my time at school, and then during this time in my early 20s where I'm starting to kind of unpick it all, started to realize, oh, that's why some of these words don't feel right or make me feel uncomfortable. It's because they have been weaponized in a really negative way against me. So I'm now struggling to really own them or identify with them.
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below. What helped you identify with the words or come out the other side where you're more comfortable with them now?
I had a realization. I had this sort of, I sort of call it my 70s coming of age week or story. I was living in LA at the time. I was 22, 23, I think. And I'd been talking with friends about identity and all of this, and sort of looking at these discomforts. And it all sort of centered around this one week, where at the start of the week, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go to LA Pride with him. And at the start of that week, I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'd never been to a Pride before. And I was sort of under this naive, I look back now and feel embarrassed, but at the time I was like, oh, I don't know if Pride's really for me. Like, I'm not really like a rainbow and glitter kind of gay. And my friend at the time, like LA, was the first time I sort of developed a queer community or a queer family, primarily like these older gay men that really took me under their wing and were just changed my life. But my friend Eric was like, shut up, we're going. And I was like, okay, sure. Okay,
Everybody
fine.
needs people like that in their lives sometimes.
Shut up.
Yeah.
And I then went and had a think, like really wanted to examine what was sort of feeding that initial reaction that I had. And yeah, it was during that week I sort of was looking at it and I was like, okay, like why do I feel like I only feel comfortable around people once I've shared that part of myself, but then I feel uncomfortable with the language. Why? What is that? And it was a realization that words like lesbian had been like weaponized and used in a derogatory way. And, relating that back to the kind of bullying around my appearance and not wanting to seem manly, and also this sort of female attachment that we have to still wanting to seem desirable to men. And there's so much there that I was like, that's why. But then I also, on the other side of it, felt like the word lesbian for me in that moment felt really restrictive. It felt like I was signing a contract that meant, well, if I'm that, I can't have any other desires beyond kind of this. Like, I can only be attractive to cis women, and any other sort of sexual desire beyond that kind of contradicts that. And it just didn't sit right with me. And I didn't have language otherwise to describe, like bisexual wasn't what I was. That didn't feel right. I don't think there were as many identifiers back then when I was sort of having these conversations and, examining things. But when it really shifted was sort of, having these conversations that week. And then a lot of queer people will say this, that they didn't really get the sort of teenage exploration years that like a lot of maybe their straight counterparts get, in terms of just, you know, hooking up with people, exploring and all of that. Like, I know for me, like I said previously, like restricted myself quite a bit because I was so like in my head of like, what does this mean? What does it, you know, how's this supposed to feel and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, in LA, I had this conversations and I was like, but what if I want to just go and like sleep with this person and that person's a man? What if that, what if I do that? And I was very fortunate. I had a friend who I was close with and felt safe with. And basically, he allowed me to explore some of these things that had been bothering me. And so this was like, midweek, and we had this evening together. And I left feeling so gay. And not because it was like awful, like it was lovely, it was fine. I feel very lucky to have had that sort of safe, beautiful experience. But it was a moment for me of taking ownership of my sexuality in a way that I hadn't previously experienced.
Yeah.
It was purely for my own exploration, for my own. Yeah, it was just, I was taking it back. It was just for me.
You were taking control.
And I left being like, I can be whoever I want to be. It was a really clear, like, sort of Breakfast Club, fist in the air at the moment when I left. And I was like, oh, I can be a lesbian. I can be gay. I can call myself these things. And they can mean what they mean to me.
Yeah.
And it was a moment of realizing that those kinds of labels or identifiers so often are for other people to figure out something about you. And it was the first time I realized that my identity is mine and I can relate to it how I want to relate to it. And that may well, and I know like me talking about this is at odds with how some other people may relate to themselves and may identify themselves. And I'm not seeking to undermine them and their experience with identity at all, but this is mine. For me, I've found power in relating to my identity in a way that is fluid and accepting that it is something that can change, that isn't restricting me, that should actually empower me. And that was my sort of moment where I figured that out. And then it was LA Pride, and it was still all of this. I say that was the moment I figured it all out. It didn't just happen like that. I did have that aha moment going home from my friend's house, but it was still very much percolating in me. So then the morning of LA Pride comes around and the news story pops up that there'd been this mass shooting in Orlando at Pulse. And that for me was a moment of like, oh, like it was almost such a grounding moment. Like I felt...
What is Pulse?
So Pulse nightclub, there was a shooting, I think it was in 2016. I might have got that date wrong, 2016 and 2015. There was a shooting at Pulse nightclub, a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. And 51 or 49 people were killed.
Wow.
It was one of the biggest at that time. It may well have changed now, but at the time it was kind of one of the biggest mass shootings to have happened. And yeah, I woke up to that news in LA, and a friend had messaged me, and my friend who I was going to Pride with had messaged me, and I remember feeling numb and like, what? I just had this moment of like, how did this happen? And why? And how do we stop? How does this not happen again? And it was almost like this coming together of this whole like 4 days prior of me realizing how sort of ignorant, yeah, my sort of feelings at the start of the week about going to Pride were, and how petty they seemed. Because I basically realized that the only way to stop something like that happening within my power is to be, as cliche as it sounds, like proud, bold, open. The only way to affect change is with the help of allies, people in the straight community, because the queer community going, stop being mean to us, stop abusing us and killing us. That's not going to change anything, unfortunately. But actually the collective action of straight people feeling just as passionately about it, about the discrimination as queer people, that could move the needle. And I thought about that, and I was like, well, but how can I expect straight people to be loud as is necessary in order to create change if I am not doing that for myself? Like, I have to inspire people to do that. And so this was in the space of a week, and I had that moment.
What a powerful bloody week.
Yeah, it is it's crazy. Which it always feels like a too personal story to share, but also I think because of the sort of arc of it and how much it did affect me, it is like significant, I think, to share. But it was that was my biggest shift, and it was a whole combination of like me realizing how I related to my identity, and then me realizing what other people needed to do, or what I needed to do in order to kind of
feel powerful. And
it was it was a week of empowerment. Like, I just suddenly felt like I'd stepped back into my body again, or I just stepped back into the control seat, or
you're back
driving seat. And I came out to my family members. I sent an email, and because also
all in the same week.
So basically, that morning of LA Pride, that had happened in Florida, and then a guy had been stopped on his way to LA Pride with a bunch of firearms and explosives in his car. So then I really did feel, going to Pride that day, I was like, I get it. And going there and seeing the floats of people, the joy was fierce that day. It was properly like Pride is a protest vibes. And I was like, fuck, I get it now. And how did I not, I felt silly.
Did you feel free after that event?
So that is the moment for me where I freed I said, took back control of myself, empowered. It was so freeing in so many ways, and also so much gratitude. I learned, I had been doing reading, I'd been learning about my queer history, but I guess I must have been slightly detached still.
Yeah.
But in this moment and this happening, it suddenly all sort of settled. I was like,
how old were you at this point?
It's 23, I must have been. I think it was a moment where I realized that we have queer history, but I'm my efforts are still required.
Yeah.
And I think maybe I'd been a bit passive up until that point because I didn't know.
But also you were exploring, and you were giving yourself permission to have moments to figure it out.
Yeah, it's true.
And you almost sound like, how was I doing this? And almost judging yourself and being unkind.
Yeah.
And so be kind to yourself, because it's a process.
You are absolutely right. Yeah. No, you're right. I think yeah.
And unfortunately, as a straight woman, I don't need to go through that process because I wasn't figuring out. I am in the normal camp. I hate that word, but I am. I'm not going, oh, what does this mean? And is this something I want to, I don't even know if it's an option, but is this something I want to follow through?
but you have to do the figuring out, which feels completely just and unfair.
Yeah. And you're totally right. Like, it is like we are all deserving of that time to figure things out. And yeah, I think very often for young queer people, like a lot of that time is behind doors by yourself. And I guess, yeah, I was relatively recent, well, yeah, I'd only had a couple of years really of having queer friends that I could even like articulate and explore and be like, did you feel this? Did you like, so very young in terms of that, in that way.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. Like, yeah.
Because growing up, it was like, do you like that boy? Do you like that boy? Do you like this? And I can't imagine what it would have been like to go, no, but there's something wrong with me. Why not? Because he's the hottest guy in the school or whatever that is.
Yeah.
It's acceptance of there's some difference, acceptance of, and again, I'm going to make an assumption on being of South Asian heritage. You get married, you have children.
Yeah, there's a way that it looked at the future.
Yes.
A certain way. I get this is also why, like, education is such a important, like, queer education, queer history being part of the curriculum and all of that is so important.
Yeah.
Because it means people like me, young queer people, aren't having to do all of this catch-up work when they're older. They aren't suddenly like, I'm an adult, but I don't know anything about where I'm from, like what I'm female.
It sounds like, listening to you, it sounds like you've done a lot of thinking. You've done a lot of processing to think.
Bit of an overthinker.
What, through your years, has been one of the most difficult things as a result of your identities?
So now that my grandparents have passed, my grandma passed away in 2020, and my granddad and grandma were very much like my cultural anchors. They were, I'd call my Biji up and she was who I would mostly speak Punjabi to with, and she was, that real link to that part of myself. And since my grandparents have passed on, I saw a very close connection with my family, aunties and uncles and cousins. But that connection is slightly different, but it still, grounds me in that way. But one of the hardest things is realizing, those spaces that connect deeply to that part of myself, they're difficult to find. So I've been in spaces with my brother, my brother's very, done a lot of work on heritage identity and his sort of Punjabi-ness, and he's fluent in Punjabi, very much moves in and out of these sort of environments with a lot of Punjabi men and Sikh men and sort of in these sort of spaces with South Asian elders in a way that he sort of, it's not sort of at odds with it, or he's found his sort of home in those places. For me, I can't, I haven't been able to. I've been in those spaces with him, and or I even being at South Asian weddings and stuff like that. I don't feel fully at home in those spaces. And I think that's probably maybe the hardest thing that I've had to maybe reckon with and make a concerted effort to find the places that do make me feel at home, or do sort of feed those sort of intersecting parts of me, the parts where I don't have to sort of explain my sexuality or who my partner is, or be worried about what
people think I'm saying, okay, and what the gossip.
Yeah, like, and yeah, that's probably been the hardest thing.
Because as South Asians, we're not overly, elder South Asians, we're not overly open-minded. And there's been some challenge as I was very,
my grandparents were lovely, amazing people. Like my grandma was very open-minded, very loving, welcoming of my partners that she was able to meet like before she passed away. And yeah, I was very, very fortunate, lucky with having that as my experience. But yes, it's not the general experience or the rule. Yeah, it's a strange one. Like, I think I also realized, like, growing up, you sort of have your safe familial sort of circles. Like in my family, they all know I'm a tomboy and they all know this. Like, so you sort of grow up within that safety and freedom to be who you are. And my family as well, I guess, in some ways is maybe unusual in that all of my cousins are mixed in some way, whether it's Indian Pakistani or Indian white British, or we are a sort of family that have all broken the mold in some way. So it's all been very much sort of accepted, and also I'm not accepted, it's just all been very mixed and different.
Yeah.
And even like my aunties and uncles growing up in the UK, in some ways they very much relate to my like mixed heritage and mixed experience, because they like they felt more British, I guess, in their upbringing than Indian. So yeah, it was quite unusual, I guess, my kind of family life in that way. So then finding spaces outside of that feel familiar or feel like they kind of feed, like I said, that these different parts of my identity, it's sort of, I felt quite limited in like where those places are, and that's been difficult, or just a difficult thing to just figure out or get my head around, I guess.
Have you found some safe places now?
Yes, yeah, I have some amazing South Asian queer friends who really make me feel like that, like it's home. But also I think it's a process within myself. Like, I think a lot of my journey with my mixed heritage identity so in a way mirrors the journey I had with my sexuality and how I identified with that. Is I went through going through a period of feeling not enough, or not brown enough, or not white enough, or not connected to the culture. I don't like, so I'm not as fluent in Punjabi as I would like, or I didn't grow up watching Bollywood films, so I don't have those cultural references, or just not feeling Indian enough, and feeling again restricted by those sort of what others required of me in order to be accepted in a certain way. And a lot of that, my work towards finding spaces where I feel comfortable and at home and safe, has been internal work as well, of being like, wait, no, there is no monolithic sort of, there is no one South Asian experience.
Yeah.
And anyone making you feel that way is not for you. Like, not all South Asian people can speak the language that their parents speak. Not all South Asian people love classical Indian music, or like, these are things that we understandably attach to or connect ourselves to in order to feel connected to our culture, but they aren't the things that make us who we are. And I think me sort of figuring that out has been a big part of me letting some of that discomfort go. So I found beautiful people who make me feel safe and myself, And I've also sort of had to do that work myself, to let myself feel enough and let myself feel at home.
When you think about your early years and you think about today, what were the processes or the systems or the work that you went through to get you to feel comfortable with who you are? And what was the most powerful in your experience that helped you the most?
Finding queer family, finding friends who I didn't find those people who made me feel safe until I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
Those people who I could have the most honest conversations with, exploring the deepest depths without feeling judged or worrying about feeling judged. Those people changed my allowed me to find myself. So having people to talk things through with, I think, has been the biggest part of my development in that way.
And having the shared experiences that you can share and openly talk about without being fearful or frightened or judged, or have someone go, well, now you sit in this box. That's what I mean.
Yeah, there's like-minded people.
Yeah.
Kind of, this goes back a little bit to what you said about the hardest thing that I've sort of encountered. It is sort of sometimes realizing that sometimes your family or the people that in many ways you are so close to or have been your cultural anchors don't maybe get you in your entirety. And sometimes there's a bit of heartbreak around that, or a bit of grief that comes with like that. But that's okay. There are other people who can fulfill. I think that's a lot to ask of anyone, right? To understand you fully, completely.
Yeah.
So I think, that's probably been part of that journey. But community, having people to talk to, friends, that have held space for me in that way to explore and to navigate things with kindness and not being restricted in that has been incredible for me.
What advice would you give anyone else who's exploring their own sexuality?
I would always say just take the pressure off yourself. Giving yourself permission to explore. Really try to take other people and their opinions out of the equation, and also just let yourself figure it out. Give yourself that time and be gentle and kind with yourself. Like I said, those sort of few years for me where I was able to do that was life-changing. I've had a few friends who are maybe older and realizing they want to figure out or wanting to explore their sexuality a bit more. I know self-conscious of being older and wanting to explore in that way and not wanting to feel like they're experimenting with someone or taking advantage of someone or wasting someone's time and all of that. And I'm like, just be honest with who, if you are going down that path of exploration, just be honest about where you're at and what your intentions are, and the right people then will show up for you. And again, in on the other side of it is if you can find a community, if you just find your friends that can sort of support you through that journey as well. Having those people to be able to speak to and speak openly with is really important.
Amazing. The post that connected us, I think, and we tried to explore the both Facebook, but I think it was your wedding post. And there was something really powerful in the stories. So I can't recapture them, but there was something really powerful in the way that you were showing up, the way that you were talking about it, the way you talked about identity earlier and the power of, I'm just going to wear whatever. And then that changed, was really, really powerful in terms of me reaching out. What ultimately led you to, I'm so comfortable that this is what I want to do now?
Yeah, so for my wedding, it was a very small affair. Like we went to a registry office with 5 or 6 friends and had a small dinner afterwards. And for the months leading up to it, I had sort of got a bit mixed up in my head of it being a small thing. So it didn't mean I hadn't put much thought into what I was wearing or anything like that, but I knew I wanted it to be special, but also connect me to my Indian heritage in some way. And I'd got myself in a bit of a bind of like, what do I feel comfortable wearing? What is that for me? I hadn't really worn kind of traditional Indian clothing for a long time. And I just went on a bit of a thought journey with it. And also, on top of all of that as well was just how do I feel about getting married? And like, what does a wedding look like for me? And what not like, what are we doing? Like, we knew what we were doing, but it was like my partner as well. We both the people who had never thought about getting married. It was never something that we were aspiring to, or this kind of neither of us had the image of what it would look like in our head.
Yeah.
Which in one way is really freeing, and it's like we can do whatever. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, that's actually also quite overwhelming. And what is it that we want to do? And what does this occasion and this moment mean for us? And we both knew in terms of the marriage part of it, like, we do love each other and we are very much, it is about commitment and all of that. But for us, it wasn't just that. Like, it's about the security that comes with it, the lawful rights that come with it. And those were sort of our driving factors. Because I think we both had a moment of like, our individual moments of crisis of like, do we believe in marriage or all of that kind of stuff that I think a lot of queer people like navigate. But it sort of came together of like, actually there's so much that is threatening us as queer people in the UK and around the world, certainly in the States right now. The threat of our rights being taken away constantly, our kind of rights being up for debate even, and it just felt for us like, actually, no, making this commitment to each other, getting this legal piece of paper feels really important and actually something that we want to do. And we'd sort of both reckoned with that was our relationship with what we were doing in terms of getting married, but in terms of how the day looks, that sort of threw me off a little bit. And I went from being a little bit hands off about it to then being like, what made it like, life is so short. This is a special day. Yes, it's about getting our rights and all of that. But actually it's significant and I want it to feel special. But then again, how does that look? And I went round and round and then eventually decided on wearing a black and gold lenga. That I'd got sent over from India, literally arrived like 2 days before the wedding. I was like express tailored to get it, sort of worked in the end. But yes, I was wearing a black and gold lenga, and my partner was wearing just some stone coloured suit trousers, but they wore sort of a tailored kurta top that had been shortened, so it was just like a shirt. And so we both wore that and felt it was a whole mixture of feelings. Like that for me personally felt like a radical decision for me to wear that to my wedding, my marriage ceremony with my partner. And then on top of that, we'll get married locally in Forest Gate. At the time, there were these pride flags that were permanently painted on the floor outside the station in Forest Gate. And a few weeks before our wedding, they'd been defaced. So someone had come and painted red paint all over the flags. The council had then repainted them. And then, so they painted the red paint on the flags the day that I was going to the restaurant to pick out our food for our post-ceremony dinner. So it felt like really like significant, like I noticed it and the police were taking a paint sample and stuff. And I got so angry and emotional, but I was also like, this is why we're doing it. This is why we're getting married, because there are still people living in our local community that actually wish us harm and wish we did not exist. So this is actually a big fuck you to them. Like, we're not going anywhere. We're going to like get our rights, as many rights as we can get. And this is why. And it really like sort of galvanized me. And then, the council repainted it. And then literally like the 2 days before, whoever, I don't think they've caught the guy who did it, came back and he painted across it. He repainted them red twice and then came back on the third time the council had repainted it and painted no in black across the flags. I saw it and I was like, okay, right. I went back to my partner and I said, I would love, like, because this restaurant where we're having our dinner was just across the road. And I said, on the way from the registry office to the dinner, I'd love it if we could just jump out at the station with our, like, there were a couple of other queer couples in our who were with us celebrating. I was like, I'd love it if we could jump out and get a photo on the flag. We had the brilliant Holly Revel, she's an amazing queer photographer, with us for the afternoon, and she was up for it as well. And we then rocked up and it was all cordoned off, like it had barricades and a metal mesh and all of that. I was like, we're not going to be able to get the photo. Damn, like I really wanted to get that protest photo. And my friends just like rolled their sleeves up, proper like power dyke energy, jumped the barrier, pulled it all, got the wooden panel that was hiding the vandalism, and we got this photo of the three couples, firstly swearing down the lens, and then the second one of us all kissing. And that was the photo that I shared as a part of the kind of announcement on Instagram that me and my partner had got married. And it was like, it just really like symbolized kind of this journey that me and my partner had gone on in terms of how we related to getting married and why it was still important. And it's so powerful. Yeah, I feel like good about it.
We started this conversation with who is Ramanique, so I'd love to go back and go, is there anything you would add or change to what you said earlier?
Love to connect with people and to, I don't know. Yeah, I would say maybe just that, but I don't really, I think I covered probably who you are.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning and play. You are a class of your own.